There's going to be a retaliation because the Houthis are not the one to be played with.
You say that the Houthi rebels are not to be trifled with. Do you know who's really not to be trifled with? The Royal Navy and the United States Navy. Firing upon either of those nation ships has never ended well for any nation throughout of all of history. But if you don't believe me, let's turn back time and go all the way back through it, shall we? To 1588 as our starting point. You see, this is where Spain, one of the world's largest colonial empires at this point, amassed the largest fleet the world had ever seen, known as the Spanish Armada, with 130 vessels. They set their way from Spain, coming over to England, trying to convert the country back to Catholicism. But the Royal Navy, headed up by Sir Francis Drake, were not having it and sent the Spanish on their merry way after completely decimating their fleet. Let's go to 1805, shall we? Lord Nelson, head of the Royal Navy, set about not only taking on the French Navy but also the Spanish Navy off the south coast of Spain on the Cape of Trafalgar. Now, by all rights, at the beginning of that battle, Lord Nelson should have lost. He was massively outnumbered. He had roughly 27 ships, whereas the combined French and Spanish had nearly 40 ships. But Lord Nelson came out on top, only losing one vessel. The Spanish and the French lost 27. The exact number that Lord Nelson had at the beginning of the battle. Trafalgar is still considered the greatest naval victory of all time, still today. But let's look at more modern context, shall we? 1916, in the Battle of Jutland, you had the two largest naval empires going up against each other, with Britain and Germany. And arguably, the arms race between the two nations prior to World War I was one of the largest catalysts for World War I. The Battle of Jutland saw 130 Royal Naval vessels go up against 99 German vessels. And yes, there were heavy losses on both sides, but the Royal Navy once again came out on top, solidifying themselves as the most mighty navy in the world. Let's look at World War II. Germany, once again, had created the largest battleship the world had ever seen in the form of the Bismarck, and it sank the Royal Navy's pride and joy, HMS Hood. And we didn't like that one bit. So we then set about sinking the Bismarck, and it only took a matter of months before it was acting as a residence for all of the local fishes. But let's enter the US Navy into the chat, shall we? In 1941, the Japanese thought it'd be a great idea to attack the US Navy at Pearl Harbor. They thought it would take 3 months for the United States to mobilize and get into the fight. But it didn't. It took only 3 weeks for the USA to get their things in order, and then 4 years later, in 1945, the USA turned Japan into the land of the rising sun. Twice. But let's look at even more context in modern terms. In the 1980s, Iran, who you have said fund the Houthis and many other terror groups in the Middle East. They are the bigger, badder brother of the Houthis. And in the 1980s, they did something similar. They tried to blockade the Red Sea from any ships going through and put sea mines everywhere throughout the Red Sea. And unfortunately, a USA warship was sailing its way through the Red Sea and ended up hitting one of these sea mines. It destroyed the ship. It is still floating today, somehow. But the USA did not like this. So Ronald Reagan, the president back then, decided to issue a proportional response with Operation Praying Mantis. This is where the US Navy went and sank 3 Iranian oil rigs and the only 2 modern frigates that they had in their navy at that point, and destroyed half the Iranian navy in just 8 hours. 1 working day it took to destroy the Houthis' bigger, badder brother. Now, before anybody jumps in the comments and says that I am a warmonger and that I love military, yes, I do like military, but I am not a warmonger. I do not want anybody to die. I want people like yourself to stop encouraging and inciting violence and saying that powers such as the Royal Navy and the United States Navy have no chance against the Houthis and that the Houthis will put up a massive fight. They won't. I'm sorry, but the USA spent $877 billion on defense last year. And okay, the Royal Navy is nowhere near the same size, but it has been feared as one of the strongest nations on the 7 seas for nearly 500 years. Those 2 nations, when it comes to naval conflict, do not lose. Please stop encouraging little insurgent groups to take on powers that they have no chance in backing. No chance whatsoever. Now, to anybody that says that the operations that were taking place last week by the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, and many others, where they attacked Houthi bases and that we were attacking Yemen. Yemen was not attacked. Houthi-controlled Yemen was attacked. And yes, 10 people lost their lives, which is tragic. However, what response were people expecting? It is unfathomable that people think that the Houthis can get away with blocking international trade in the Red Sea. They have no control over the Red Sea. That is international waters. Please stop encouraging small groups to go up against the mightiest navies the world has ever seen. People will die and people will get hurt. Enough. Do better, as you were.